Welcome to The Riff, where writer and investor Byrne and I discuss the major inflection points caused by technological change. Our weekly conversation covers the obvious and not so obvious ways in which markets and businesses will adapt as a result. Let's jump right in. So Byrne, we're talking on the day just when OpenAI just announced their new developments. You just had a post the other day where you talked about how LLMs will have profound downstream effects on what people learn, who they talk to, even how they communicate. So let's get into how you feel about all of this and what this all means.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the OpenAI presentation. It's nice. There's something kind of vivid about Sam Altman, like posing in front of basically like the skulls of his enemies, like all of these startups that have been killed because they're now features. But that's sort of what you have to be used to if you're building the obvious thing to build on something somebody else builds, is that they might also notice the obvious and build it too. Yeah, so like the general idea on LLMs changing communications is this idea that you're normally stuck communicating at a given resolution. If you are a tech person and you're reading a lay person's explanation of some technology, and you know that they have something useful to say, you're also going to get through it, like you're trolling through all these explanations of like, here's what a browser is, here's what an app is, and they spell out what TCP/IP means and all this stuff, and you wish you could skip it. Well, now you can skip it. But on the other hand, if you're reading something you're totally unfamiliar with, and you're just hit with this blizzard of acronyms and terminology and symbols and references, that can also be a slog to get through because you're constantly pausing and trying to unpack things. And I think reading something that you're unfamiliar with side by side with ChatGPT is this really interesting experience where you basically get to tell the writer, okay, stop, slow down, wait, let's take a step back and just explain that again. Like explain it like I'm five. And then you also get to take a document that that has some things you need and some things mostly things you don't care about. And you basically get to run that through an LLM and say, okay, explain this like I'm not five at all. Explain this like I'm an adult and I know like most of this already. So I think that that means there's just more stuff that is consumable to you. I think one narrow but interesting application of that is translations. So there are just some works that haven't been translated into English but are interesting, and then English is the kind of everyone's second language. So there are many more works that haven't been translated into other languages, and I think that's something we'll talk about in the past chats. Like there's a time in the not too distant future where the idea of untranslated work is going to be this anachronism. It'll be like being lost. Like you could, it's possible for something like that to happen if there's a book that's never been scanned, never been digitized, and nobody's bothered. But once there's a digital copy and once somebody has the rights to do it, it's just a matter of running it through an API. And yeah, you can read, you can read your differential equations textbook in Tagalog if that's what you want to do. And that's actually going to be really interesting because it broadens the number of people who have access to a given kind of information. It means that there are fewer language barriers, but I don't know that means that fewer people will speak English because the interpersonal stuff will actually still matter. And in fact, I think another piece of this is that because the set of ideas you could access will be broader, the set of people you could have an interesting conversation with will also be broader. So you may end up having this set of friends where you don't actually speak a common language, but you have really interesting conversations that you're translating, or where you speak a common human language, but you use totally different terminology, and you can still have an interesting discussion with them. I think another the idea of transpiling something into a different ideological framework. So if you're like, this is an interesting Marxist argument, but I'm not a Marxist and I don't have the Marxist jargon. Like make this integralist, make this libertarian instead, but make the same point. Like find the same points, but frame them with that different ideology. I think that's probably trickier to do right now, but not too far off.
You could quantify sort of the Russell conjugation or the bias. Hey, this has a this kind of bias or this kind of bias, or this if it would be framed different. This is how I'd frame it if I was this. Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing we were talking about just before the podcast is one thing on your mind is where exactly will AI be incorporated? Why don't you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so I recently started doing AI-generated summaries of pieces in the diff because there were people who would say that they'd subscribed and they unsubscribed because they weren't sure what to read. They didn't want to read all of it, and it was just hard to tell what would be interesting, and so they just didn't end up getting as much value out of it as they thought they would. And I thought, well, this is not, an unsolvable problem. We can just generate a summary so they at least know what they're getting into. And if there's a kind of cryptic title for something, but the summary would make it sound more interesting, then they will go ahead and read that. So I started doing that. And the first couple times I did it, I sent it along with this note saying, just so you know, these are partially AI generated human edited summaries. And so one of my readers emailed back and was like, well, I've already been doing this. And I thought that was interesting. But there had been other readers who had been doing the from side-by-side thing that I mentioned, where I say something kind of esoteric about options or whatever, and they would just plug it into ChatGPT, ask for an explanation. And one of the things that occurred to me is this question of, where does this stuff naturally get done? Does it naturally get done by publishers? Does it naturally get done by the email client, or your ad, or whatever? And I think there are some industries where that question of where does the AI get done gets really interesting, because you can imagine this ecosystem where there's some companies that are like pure data providers, and then they're like pure prompt providers. So there's like a set of people who are giving a model training data. There's another set of people who are coming up with interesting prompts and basically giving you ways to explore that latent space data. And then there are the people who actually own the models. And one of the questions that naturally arises there is like, which of those is actually durable, and which one has better unit economics? And where I think that ends up is that you want to be in a position where you're getting the data and you are actually the one applying you're applying the model to it and giving people the output of that model and letting them interact with the model rather than the raw data, because you're getting a lot of data usage of that app. Like you're getting a lot of data from what queries do people do, instead of I'm sending a newsletter, it's like I'm uploading something to a vector database that you query it, you ask. Knowing what the queries are tells you something about people's interests and tells you where they're being served, where they're not being served, and what to create next. And you can train some pretty sophisticated stuff on that. So the example that came up to me was transcript providers in finance, both transcripts of corporate earnings calls, transcripts of false experts, where they have started just doing LLM summaries. And I'm sure that months before they were doing that, hedge funds were producing their own LLM-based summaries. And I was wondering who's going to be better. And what I thought was, if you're at a hedge fund, you have all these analysts, they have been reading the document, taking notes, sending their portfolio manager, okay, there was like this company held an investor day, they talked for 6 hours, here are the 5 things that actually mattered. And so that's really good training data. That's you have a bunch of tokens as an input, you have a couple tokens as an output. Okay, that's what you usually start with. But even if the quality is not as high, if you just have a larger quantity of data, if you have been posting transcripts for decades, people have been saving their highlights and adding little notes for decades, you just have so much information on what do people actually extract from that data. So you actually probably have a better product. And one of the intuition pumps there is that alpha generation is one of the most fragmented industries on earth. Like, nobody has 10% market share. I don't think anybody has 1% market share. So even if you're at an elite firm, the overwhelming majority of the value added and investment is by people who don't work at your firm, but probably a large fraction of it is by people who do use the same tools that you use. So those tools are going to get a lot smarter faster than your firm gets smarter. And if the whole data ecosystem is getting smarter all the time and it's getting smarter faster, you have to be getting smarter faster than it's getting smarter, or you're just left behind and you're just like this low value added redistributor of, a really, really smart automated summary from Backstack or Tigas or Bloomberg or whoever. So it's also another case where software, where there are higher returns to scale in AI than there are in the rest of software, where the returns to scale are already great.
I want to zoom out a bit and sort of make a comparison to Facebook and Meta, where for the last few years, there was this concern about, hey, what are really opportunities in consumer social in an environment where Meta is so dominant, across, and anything that's working, they'll just copy or buy or whatever. And similarly, I want to ask the opportunity of like, where is an opportunity right now in terms of OpenAI? We mentioned that, them just shattering the dreams, and it seems like that will only continue. With Facebook and Meta, people have been saying, hey, you need to compete, do things that they can't do. So you sort of like more unsavory content, as an example, like what are things that Meta can't do because it's highly regulated, regulatory, or things for much younger people, or sort of different formats that would undercut what they're currently doing, maybe. And similarly for what are things that OpenAI will never do? Is that one sort of framework or evaluating like if you're a venture capitalist right now, how are you thinking about opportunities in AI, and where might you be placing your bets?
That's a really tough one. I think that one frame is, okay, you look at these compounding data advantages, and then you try to look at cases where the data advantage could be risky, although OpenAI always assures people they're not actually training based on user interactions. So they have sort of foreclosed that opportunity. I think there may be cases where you just say, this is hard to scale, and we can maybe gesture at what we think their future product roadmap is and say that it's, this is not something they're going to launch a commoditized version of in 6 months. But empirically, that's hard to do, because every time they make a new product announcement, a bunch of companies die, and it's not necessarily the really obvious ones. So I thought that one of the really interesting announcements they had, I forgot how they characterized this. It's basically, you take a product, you describe what you want to do, and they will give you code for the API calls that you want to run to do that thing. And that was really interesting to me, because if you look at how a lot of enterprise software companies expand their headcount, there's always this mystery of why do so many people work at DocuSign? Why do so many people work at Bill.com? Why do so many people work at all these companies? And I don't think the answer is they're just terribly deficient. Like, a lot of the answer is they have all these integrations with all these other companies, and you need a lot of people to build those, and you need a lot of people to retain them. And like, once you offer the integration, if the company you're working with changes its API, now you've got to change the things. And if all of that gets easier, then it is faster to build a company. I guess if I were looking at opportunities, investable opportunities in AI, I would be doing what I think more people are doing now, which is looking for these data acquisition modes, looking for a case where there's some specific domain where the data is not online, it's not scrapable, you can't just download it, and or whether it's for IP restriction reasons or because just nobody's downloaded it. Healthcare data would be a really good example of that. Like, if you're downloading lots and lots of healthcare data, you're probably committing a crime after someone else has committed a crime to post it online in the first place. So finding companies that have that kind of lockdown data, and then making sure that that it's compliant, that it's not a as the AI gets smarter, it becomes more and more of a HIPAA violation to have your model looking at all this personal identifiable information and all this healthcare data from individuals. But yeah, finding cases like that where there is a lot of data, where the amount of data is growing fast, where it is not posted online, will not be posted online, and where there are specific constraints on the models inputs or outputs that would matter to that industry and wouldn't matter to others, I think is a good general framework to start with. That's a place where you could have a durable advantage. May just not be on the radar of OpenAI. And I think the other on the radar thing is like looking for companies that are looking for industries that have been very slow to digitize, but that are generating more data. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think, an interesting place for data acquisition is like IoT, not in the kind of lame sense of like your refrigerator can get hacked and start spamming, but in the sense of tracking complicated machines that are very expensive and where downtime is extremely expensive, and just tracking every possible input from those machines. On the other hand, if you do that, annoyingly, you're now in a place where you're just very far behind the fully integrated companies that have been putting sensors on machines, building models from the sensor data for a really long time. So it's hard. Like, that's one of the frustrating things about the AI boom has been that you get really excited about how much the world is changing, and you're like, well, which of these companies that have been big established companies for a decade plus am I most excited to invest in? Like, is it the software company founded in the 1970s that has great distribution, and where, the Outlook inbox outbox is like this wonderful set of training data where basically if you have an email job, your inbox and outbox are this wonderful set of training data on everything you actually do? Or is it the dominant social network that was founded almost 20 years ago? Or, is it the GPU company founded in the 90s? Like, it's kind of frustrating that it's hard for new entrants to scale massively. And a lot of the new entrants that do scale, they scale in part through partnerships with these established companies. On the other hand, there are spaces where there are just different sets of customer constraints and different things, different things people need from the model, different levels of accuracy they require, and different levels of data sensitivity that they require. Some unannounced personal investment in one such company that I think is really exciting. And it is a case where you could sketch out why this is a really interesting idea and where some of the flywheels are, and also you could sketch out why this is not probably not on OpenAI's immediate roadmap. And then the roadmap question, it's never about will this never be on the roadmap. It's always, can you sketch out a roadmap that is a little bit farther than a little bit past the OpenAI event horizon, where everything just gets swallowed, and that still has something valuable to add, and where your customers will be excited about what you offer right now, and will be excited about the next thing you launch, and will not, be immediately DMing you live while Sam Altman is talking, saying, "Hey, we need to talk about how much you're charging and how much he's charging."
Hey, everybody. Eric here with a word from our sponsors. The Riff is sponsored by my longtime partners, Secureframe, the only compliance automation platform with AI capabilities that helps customers speed up cloud remediation and security questionnaires. One of the things I love about Secureframe is that it takes this time-consuming process that every company has to do in order to unlock revenue from other companies and makes it easy and simple. Secureframe empowers businesses to build trust with customers by simplifying information, security, and compliance through AI, not wasteful human hours, by automating manual tasks related to security risk and compliance. Secureframe allows companies to focus on growing their business. Thousands of fast-growing businesses use Secureframe, including AngelList, Ramp, and Coda, to expedite their compliance journey. I believe in them so much I invested in them. If there is an acronym that your company dreads, Secureframe can help. Sign up for a free demo at secureframe.com/riff and mention the Riff during your demo to get 20% off your first year of Secureframe. Yeah, I've been interested in data sets that either OpenAI won't get access to or aren't even online yet. One that I've thought about for years but haven't quite figured out the right wedge or entry point or fantasized for years is basically reputation. So what people think about each other, is very valuable information. It sort of doesn't want to be on the internet, it seems, or people have had a very difficult time trying to do that. I do think it's going to happen eventually, and some, and it already happens in certain verticals, like ratemyprofessor.com, for example. There's a lot of good data on what people think about their, and you can imagine that for every profession. But then sort of people are more than their professions, right? And people are gossiped about in more than their professions. People fantasize about LinkedIn competitors for such a long time. And LinkedIn is the product that just, even though people hate it, it just sticks. And one of the ways in which people hate it is this way. People will always message us and say, "Hey, do you know this person? It says you're connected on LinkedIn." And you're like, "Well, not really, or not super well." I mean, email has that data, but much more granular, but yeah, is not used in that way. Anyways, these are just examples of data sets that just haven't been sort of properly structured.
Yeah, the interesting one on reputation would be Zoom or Google Meet identifying who is a liar based on visual cues of dishonesty, and how they, if it's Google, they can also look at Gmail. So they could, and this would be monstrous PII violation. They cannot do this. They, if you even joke about it, I'm sure you get a very serious lecture. But you could imagine training some model based on looking at transcripts of conversations people have, and looking at what they email to people who are not in that conversation about the topic of that conversation, and just looking for what are the facial expressions, what are the gestures, what are the phrases that indicate someone is absolutely not telling the truth. And that'd be useful data in a lot of cases. I think it's kind of nightmarish to think about it actually getting released everywhere, but so it's fun to know that this exists in the latent space of nightmare AI scenarios.
Totally. And segueing a little bit, it's interesting. So Sam Altman in 2018 or whenever he left Y Combinator, I can't remember, but really had a tremendous, to put it lightly, follow-up act where people thought that he was gone for a little bit. They were like, "Oh, he's less relevant now. He was kind of wandering in the woods. Maybe he was fired from Wise." Who really knows, right? And he picked this OpenAI experiment is nonprofit. People didn't really take it too seriously, and yet he looks like a genius, right? And so there's a similar question as to, if you're also in between things and looking for your own OpenAI opportunity, what is the space right now that has been building up a lot of substance over the years or decades in the case of AI, but is just underrated or underappreciated, or within 5 years or 5 to 10 years, you could have your own OpenAI moment. And I wonder if that's something in bio. I wonder if that's something in biotech or longevity or something that has had a lot of attention, but not quite sort of or a lot of a lot of dollars, a lot of smart people, but not quite this OpenAI moment? Or what are your thoughts to that? If Sam Altman was free, was left YC today, 2023, and could do anything, was talented, could raise money, etc., but not like a domain expert necessarily, but just a smart generalist, where would Sam Altman spend time today? Given that AI has already had its moment.
That is a really hard question. I almost feel like if you want a really good answer from that, you should give me, the millions of dollars you would get from running YC for a while, and then a couple months to years to find myself, and then I'd have a good answer. I feel like it's really tough to have an off-the-cuff answer, and I don't actually know the extent to which Sam was out of YC and then thinking about the next thing to do, or thinking about should he just retire and enjoy life, or whether there was this constant building interest in AI over time, where at some point he realized actually this is more important, and YC is actually too high an opportunity cost, and I have to go do something else. I don't know, but it is a really, really tough question to answer. I do think, off-the-cuff biology, it sounds right. I think the regulatory obstacles there get very annoying. So maybe if there's a special economic zone for that, I think that would make things more promising. But actually, special economic zones in general, and the idea of building online communities or building IRL communities, I think that is a domain whose time is definitely coming, because we've had this long period where we've been able to form these digital communities really well, and that ends up being this nice complement to physical meetups. And I went to a really, really good academic conference this weekend on the work of Renee Girard, and there were just a ton of people there where I knew them. Online under real names, online under fake names, and but I knew them, and it was really, really good to hang out. And like all such conferences, you wish it were much, much longer. And you can sort of extrapolate that to, well, what if the conference were just indefinite? What if we all just co-located to some new place? And because we all agree on certain weird things, which is why we coalesce as a community, why don't we ensure that place actually adheres to those weird norms? So, I think that is, step one of new social networks forming online is you meet people online, and then step two is two-way plane tickets, and then step three is one-way plane tickets. You go somewhere, you do not go back. It's your new home, and you're actually home for the first time, really for the first time since you were just entirely too online and spent all of your online time with this set of friends and got really close to them. And I think that is definitely an area that gets really interesting. You once again have you have even more serious regulatory challenges in one sense, but in another sense, you do get to somewhat choose what regulations you live under. Because once you say what matters is not exactly where I am, because where I want to be, the center of my universe is wherever all of my friends choose to go, then maybe you guys all put together a dominant assurance contract. You say, if enough of us choose to move somewhere, we all either move there or pay some giant, forfeit some giant sum of money because we actually overpromised. And then you shop around for the right jurisdiction and find somewhere that you can actually call home. So I think that would be a bet for something really interesting. And I think that, being, the number of countries in the world is probably way too low. It's way lower than the number of potential theoretically possible countries. And so we should get that number up.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've been thinking about this quite a bit as well. Like you, having been close to the charter city and network state sort of communities and projects, but then also I moved to Miami. You were in Austin, and so as part of the Keith Raboy crew who moved down there, and I don't know if there were a few hundred or a couple thousand, but there's definitely a crew that moved there. And I've actually been thinking most recently about hey, there's the Praxis of the world that are coordinating online and then trying to coordinate with some government to get some special deal. And I appreciate sort of the regulatory arbitrage or experimentation that enables. But one thing I've been a little bit sober on over the past couple of years is just how hard it is to get people to move, and how much people are willing to tolerate. Even Balaji has come around recently saying, hey, people aren't leaving San Francisco. Like, or not everyone is going to leave, or most people are going to stay, no matter how bad it gets. The Gary Tans of the world, like brilliant, successful, wealthy people, are going to pay taxes. There'll be some that leave, some sort of libertarian, crypto folks, and and others too. But most people are going to stay, and so it's a little bit like Paul Graham told Elon, he's like, why don't you just create a new Twitter? It would be trivial, and you could just do it, as opposed to try to take over the existing one. That feels like a lot of bureaucracy. That feels very difficult. And of course, we've seen a lot of Twitter clones. We'll get into your piece on that in a minute. And that's really hard to do. And actually, Twitter's network effects are just so strong, which is similar to San Francisco. And so I wonder, you're familiar with the Free State Project, of course. You sort of this, for the audience, this group of people that, I think it's New Hampshire, that basically said, hey, let's like try to change the politics of New Hampshire by or an element of New Hampshire by moving enough sort of aligned people. And I'm surprised why more people don't try that in San Francisco or in New York, just saying, hey, like, well, to start, we should have more agglomeration. Like, smart, aligned people should live together, per your point. And I feel like we've thought about exit a bit too much and not enough. I don't know if it's voice or just enough about trying to change it, sort of do it what Elon did to Twitter, which is different because he bought the whole thing, but changing it from with sort of taking over, but within cities. Like, the supervisor votes are determined by hundreds or low thousands of votes. Like, why couldn't 10,000 people move to San Francisco and change the politics of the city? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would hope that would work. I think it's like the track record of taking decaying institutions and turning them around it's just not great. And it often turns out that you found one problem, and then once you're nominally in charge, you find like 50 other problems that the people in charge have either been like shunting aside, or like it was a problem for them too, and so they were partly ineffective for these more structural institutional reasons. And then you realize that you need a bigger head start to get rid of those. Like, I hope it works. I hope that Gary Tan is able to ruthlessly seize power and implement or like obvious reforms, but I worry that that's not enough. And I think, you end up with this weird balance where you sort of, as some people leave those cities, the people who are left are the people who are just more satisfied with the status quo. And I think in SF, one of the really interesting dynamics is that there are definitely parts of the city that do feel sort of like, they feel like a really, really nice city in the developed world where things function really well. And as long as you're always in those neighborhoods or in an Uber to a tech company office, it's sort of like that. There's that little soliloquy in Bonfire of the Vanities. I forget if he uses the term airlock or what, but it's like as he travels through Manhattan, he just keeps himself hermetically sealed from the rest of the city, and he goes straight from the townhouse to the trading floor with like 20 seconds of exposure to actual New York, and it's fine. And I worry that as the people who can't even tolerate the 20 seconds of exposure leave, or as the people who can't afford the hermetic seal leave, that you actually end up with people who are indifferent because they sort of exist more online than IRL, and the stuff that they're doing, they are doing it for a global market. Like, if you work at a software company, it doesn't really matter what happens in San Francisco as long as your physical safety is not threatened, and as long as the taxes don't get too high too fast. Like, you're okay with a pretty wide range of outcomes in the Tenderloin as long as you go around it. So that tends to mean that you can have these cities that have these agglomerations of talent and lots of super smart and effective people, and also a slight majority of maybe ineffective to counter-effective people who keep voting in the wrong people. And that just ends up being a stable equilibrium because everyone in the middle leaves. And people in the middle are the swing voters who actually determine political change, or at least, like, I guess they determine like year to year, election to election political changes. I think the more sweeping changes, it's not the New Deal did not happen because there were a couple swing voters in a couple places who changed their minds. There were actual personalities and plans at work. People had these definite visions of what the state should be and what the state should do, and they put them into place. So when things get really extreme, then you have a different dynamic. But I guess we're annoyingly not there yet. We're just in this weird purgatory.
To the extent that Elon, you believe he wholesale sort of reformed Twitter, took it over and took it over as if it were starting a new thing, or like having total control. To the extent that you agree with that characterization, do you think that we should be more optimistic about our ability to reform institutions, or do you think that was either not the right characterization or just an exception that sort of proves the rule?
Yeah. I think the misunderstood thing about Twitter, which I didn't really understand until I was thinking about why it hasn't died yet, because it is kind of surprising. Like, there have been more outages. Like the pace of new feature shipping has gotten better, but it's a less reliable site than it used to be, at least in my experience. It I think what happens on Twitter that makes it really durable is you have this very hyper-specific network effect around emerging new events, where if you know that Sam Altman is speaking and you want to know exactly what's being said in real time, you want all the pull quotes, you should not go to the second best site, because there will be slightly slower people, there'll be slightly lower density of quotes. And you know that Twitter is probably where to go to get those real-time updates. I think the closest exception to that is that if you're hearing about something that you think is market moving in some sense, you can just open up Google Finance or something and just be looking at the stock ticker live. If it's a more narrow question and it exists on manifold markets or another prediction market, then you could have that window open and see live people react to this news. But it's really hard to have a live look at what's going on anywhere except Twitter. And since if you're already on Twitter, whenever anything interesting is happening right now and you won't follow it, then Twitter is probably where you will end up posting your immediate response to whatever's happening right now. So you contribute to that network effect. And those networks, they spin up in response to every new emerging event, because there's always a different cohort of people who are interested. And like even within different Twitter groups, there's like sometimes it's AI Twitter and SaaS Twitter, sometimes it's like AI Twitter and hardware rumor Twitter. Sometimes it's like AI Twitter and stock market Twitter. So, FitTwit. So you get different intersections of those social networks, and no one's been able to peel off a super majority of any one of those networks, but you'd really have to get the network and all the adjacent networks, or like if you get like this one core network, but all the adjacent networks are still on Twitter, then whenever any really big thing happens, all of the people in that middle network, they go back from Blue Sky to Twitter because they realize they're a little bit behind and they're really addicted to being right on the cutting edge all the time. So that's been, I think, a surprising contributor to that. Like I've never had Twitter open during some emerging event and wondered what was going on Blue Sky or Mastodon or Threads. Like I'm sure there's some good stuff. Like I'm sure I'm missing stuff. And if there were some universal network of short messages, that would be even better. But since no one has an incentive to let that happen, then Twitter still ends up being it. It's really tough to bet against Meta. I own shares of Meta, so I'm betting on Meta for the moment. But they will have to really think carefully about where it is that they can have, like, what communities on Meta can end up on Threads, like, and prefer Threads to Twitter, such that the marginal new person who cares about emerging, like who cares about breaking news or just cares about fun jokes about current events, can go to their site and not the other one. And then since Threads, they did explicitly say they want to downplay news on the service compared to other kinds of content, maybe they are actually competing in a slightly different market. Like maybe they do get the sort of timeless short form observations and they don't get the other stuff. But then you run into the problem of there are, in addition to those emerging temporary situational social networks that Twitter still dominates, there are the longer term ones where you meet someone because you get to know someone on Twitter because you're talking about some work interest or sports or a movie or genre or whatever, but you end up actually knowing them and caring about how their dog is doing or the funny thing their kid said or whatever. So then you're stuck in whatever the dominant network is.
Yeah, and you're saying there's opportunity to build vertical specific networks, but it's unclear how big the prize is, because even Twitter itself, it's unclear how big the prize is there, right?
Yeah, and that you don't know what the vertical will be, and Twitter seems to win disproportionately when the vertical is extremely narrow. When the vertical is like, what did Tim Cook say on Apple's earnings call right now today? That's a network that exists 4 times a year, and then it goes away. And while it exists on Twitter, and then it has to be reassembled. Like anyone who wants to be with Twitter, they have to be able to reassemble those networks on the fly, not knowing what the network will be. So it's just like whichever site has the most addicts and has the most people who are paying attention to the news and then filtering it and commenting on it and commenting on the comments and so on. That site just has this durable advantage that lasts. I think it lasts longer than other social network advantages, in part because the fact that the mini networks, like the little epicycles of networks within it, are so temporary that you just don't know what to build and you don't know who to target to build the next one.
It is interesting. Like from a consumer perspective, if you were to compare, 2024 and 2019 as an example in terms of how consumers spend time with their phones, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snap, WhatsApp, et cetera, it feels like it's not that different. And even like 10 years ago, outside of TikTok and certainly decreased Facebook usage, but, supplemented by just them owning Instagram and WhatsApp, it feels like, and, LinkedIn, let's add to that. It feels like there's just not that much different use case. And so it's interesting to think about, like 5 to 10 years from now, is it really just going to be, Twitter, Insta, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, TikTok, kind of like having the same use cases, or are we going to have a different paradigm of social? It's almost like, we'll get to AGI sooner than we'll disrupt LinkedIn or something, or sooner than like we'll disrupt Twitter. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Like the next trillion intelligent beings will all be AGI agents, but they will all have LinkedIn profiles and they will be messaging you constantly. Yeah, I think like this happens in other categories. Like there was a time when Office software was just this continuous flurry of different changes, and Microsoft was always worried about falling behind, and everyone's trying to figure out what is the actual Office suite. They like PowerPoint was added to the mix, and word processing, its nature sort of changed, and then after a while, it became more like the standard got defined by the products, and at this point, if someone says send me a deck, like they almost never mean send me a Keynote file. They mean either send me a PowerPoint if it's like a Fortune 500, or they mean export your Keynote file to a PDF if it's like you're pitching a Fortune 500 and you're not a Fortune 500. So there's like, Google has made some inroads there. They do some things better. Like I think their spell check in Google Docs is actually really excellent, very contextually aware. The mistakes it makes are really interesting, clever mistakes, and so that is hard to beat. But for other stuff, yeah, once the category is really established, and once you have this dominant player, they sort of define what that category is, and then there can be other categories. So I think, like if you defined document editing, or if you define like spreadsheets as Excel, then you can say, or yeah, I guess if you take the tasks that people did in spreadsheets 10 or 20 years ago and say, well, that's a category, Excel still wins that. But there are a lot of things where people used to do it in increasingly complicated Excel spreadsheets. And then they were like, we have to stop doing it in Excel. Like everything is breaking. And when you hit F9 to reload, your computer just hangs for 10 minutes. So let's just do it in pandas, and we'll store the data in a database instead of in, a giant tab in our spreadsheet. And so some of those tasks just moved over to a different medium that was better suited to them, but it's not part of the same category at all. Like pandas is a free product anyone can download. So it doesn't have market share in revenue terms, but it does have market share in usage terms, and is slowly eating into some of the Excel use cases. But then there are other things where just the Excel data model has affected the data model people have in their head when they think about company financials and operating models and things like that. So once your product establishes the lingua franca for a category, it becomes hard to disrupt, even though it does mean that you eventually reach this sort of static point where there's a lot you can't change because everyone's used to it. And one of the cool things about Excel is that they, in some cases, retain backwards compatibility for menu shortcuts that no longer exist. So like the same sequence that starts with Alt, it used to navigate through a menu, and now it just does a thing, and the menu doesn't really exist anymore. So they've maintained backwards compatibility with people's muscle memories, but that also means that they have to define this set of tasks that users want to accomplish, and they can't really touch things that might interfere with those tasks. If we define social network use cases the way that we define them right now, then we probably have some of the same things. But I don't know, I could imagine that say a TikTok substitute that is just like a continuous stream of AI generated viral entertainment TikTok has this huge surface area of content they could show you based on all the little signals from all your behaviors. But the latent space of hypothetical meme videos is even bigger than the actual space of meme videos. So you could imagine a replacement for that. And it's not a coincidence that I chose the newest one as the one that's most disruptible, because that's generally the case. Like things that are new can be disrupted. The older they get, the more they have just the more we've sort of grafted them into a process or grafted them onto our behavior, and can't really change it.
I want to segue into sort of something you've written about, and a trend that's happened where sort of tech companies are trying to become more like media companies, and media companies are trying to add more products on top of their distribution. You wrote about you had a post called "Write Your Own Catalyst" about Hunderbrook, a company that does investigative research and trades ahead of it. And I think that's kind of an interesting combination of media and monetization. And you, of course, for the diff, have thought a lot about, hey, you're creating a lot of value in the world with your writing. What is the best monetization for you to capture that value? So let's both talk about sort of the broad trend and as you see it, or different models that have intrigued you. Maybe this one, Hunterbrook, as an example, but then also how you've thought about your own individual business and the idea maze you've explored as to what makes the most sense for what you want to do.
Yeah, so my reaction to Hunterbrook was partly, and this is something Matt Levine mentioned too, is like, this is in some ways old news. Like, a very, very common thing in discretionary investing on many different timescales is you come up with an idea, you make a trade, you immediately tell a bunch of people about your idea so that they make the same trade. Like, there are literally conferences that are devoted to this. And you can go to these conferences and you hear a bunch of pitches, and sometimes you can look up the holdings of the hedge fund whose manager is doing that pitch, and you're like, wow, it looks like your biggest long position is your top long pitch, and then the thing you want a bunch of puts on is your top short pitch. But it's really valuable for them to share their idea, especially if they know that this company is misunderstood and they can get it better understood. It's valuable for them to get feedback on their idea and to get it critiqued. And then it's also valuable for the listener, both because you get an idea, you're not the first person to get it, but there's still usually room for that idea to work. And you may get these second order ideas from, okay, they pointed out like this difference between these two companies, and we can apply that model to a different domain and then find the next version of the thing that they pitched. So that part, I think, was kind of had existed for a long time. But I think if you flip it around and say, what if Hunterbrook is actually like a different way to think about the editorial calendar, where you are specifically trying to find the stories that will move the market? I think that actually has some potential. I have heard that Bloomberg at least has done that in the past. They used to rank people based on how much their stories moved the market, among other criteria. And I don't know if they still do, and I don't know how much of a factor that was, but that kind of thing has been done. But I think there's room to make that the core of the business model, rather than make that just one element among many in a very big and complicated bundle where the economics of any one part of it are really, really opaque. In general, I think that it's been interesting to see this simultaneous process of media companies realizing, hey, if we go direct to consumer, we don't have to be reliant on Netflix, and we aren't using our content to subsidize their audience acquisition, so they can make their own content and cut us out of this entirely. And meanwhile, that they can help erode the traditional theatrical release model and like help erode every part of the business model and turn it into something they control. That turns out to be a lot harder than it looks. Like, the part where you spend a ton of money on original content and a ton of money marketing it, a lot of people can copy that aspect of Netflix. And then the part where you do eventually start generating serious free cash flow has been harder for many competitors. But we'll see. Disney has a great content library, and now they just have a lot more granular information about what people want to see, what they care about. Like, I've always been obsessed with this idea that Netflix, they can literally tell, which character or which plot line you respond to more by looking at when do you actually pause. And if there's someone where you could just say, like, statistically, if this person is on the screen delivering a monologue, you will not pause. Or like, if there's an action scene in this movie, you will not stop until it's over, no matter what your bodily needs are. That's very useful information for them, and it's information nobody else has. So they're building a data moat. Again, we're back to our original topic. They're building a data moat. No one else can emulate it. With Disney, I think part of the bet you have to make is like the existing IP, like the franchise value of Star Wars and Marvel and all the Disney stuff is like that, plus a lesser data moat that maybe doesn't go quite as fast and where they don't have quite the same data science team. That maybe the sum of those is comparable to Netflix. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. For others, it's just harder to say. Like, you feel bad for Warner Brothers Discovery that they don't want to be completely left behind and own just this legacy business where you basically, when you're trying to come up with your long-term financial projections, it's like, let's call an actuary and see how soon our customers will die. But on the other hand, I don't know how many independent streaming services the world actually needs, and I don't know how many can reach viable economics. It looks like a lot of them have dialed back their expansion significantly, and they have seen some price power. So it does seem like people just get attached to certain franchises, and they do have some willingness to spend more, but it'll be a while before that process finishes. And then on the other end, you have tech companies that are trying to bundle in more media and entertainment options. Amazon is the most salient example. And they're actually, like, it turns out both of these businesses are really hard. Like, you can lose billions of dollars on a streaming service, but you can also lose a lot of money on a new Lord of the Rings series. So nobody, like everybody, I think everybody might have seen the other company's job as the easy one, and theirs is the one that really requires finesse. And then it turned out that everybody was right that their job is actually hard, and you have to be really, really talented to get it right. And even then, you have to be like talented and lucky to get it right persistently. In terms of the diff model, I've always had that line of newsletter is it can be a business, but it can also be a customer list and brand name in search of a business. I'm very excited to read the new Bridgewater Associates book, because Bridgewater is just in dollar terms the most impressive example of this, where it was just Ray sharing his thoughts on the market with subscribers, and eventually his subscribers were like, Ray, please, instead of us faxing this to the portfolio manager, why don't we cut out several middlemen and have you be the portfolio manager? So that is a very enticing proposition to me. And I think, like, one possibility is that the entire arc of Bridgewater has been, they start as a newsletter that has really, really good financial advice. They turn into a hedge fund that's operationalizing that advice, and then performance declines, but the newsletter remains good. And so it eventually becomes just the world's highest ticket newsletter, where you're literally paying millions of dollars a year to read Ray's thoughts, and then you repeat Ray's thoughts. You sound very, very smart, because they have a lot of researchers doing a lot of work on every economic phenomenon imaginable, and maybe even if your returns are not amazing, you're still happy with the overall business. But I do think, like, when you have a newsletter, you're creating this self-selected group of people. They have some things in common, but they know you. They don't necessarily know each other. And when you have a self-selected group of people with interests in common, and those interests are lucrative, and if you fall down the list of the Forbes 400, finance and technology are very, very common sources of wealth, and growing over time. There's just a lot of opportunities to make profitable introductions. And then there are a lot of businesses that are fundamentally the business of making an introduction between two people who can make a lot of money together, and then finding a way to get paid for that. So I do recruiting through the newsletter, and I've done some investing through the newsletter, and do more of that, done more of that over time. And I will continue to expand those things, and just continue to make the newsletter this nexus of more of a merchant bank, and less of just me sending email blasts to lots of people. The email will be part of the mix for a very long time. I do enjoy the research process. I enjoy the writing process. I really enjoy getting feedback from readers, positive and negative. I think that's one of the just hidden joys of the paid newsletter model is, and this is something Substack has talked about a lot, is like, there are hate readers for free media, but there are not really hate subscribers. So if people are paying to read your stuff and they disagree with you, they actually give constructive criticism. They will tell you what you did wrong. And it's actually, like, one of the kind of minor details here is, like, I've noticed that some of the people with really impressive engineering backgrounds are incredibly good at spotting typos. And there's got to be a connection there, that if you can look at a page of source code and you can be like, oh, you missed a semicolon. Oh, that should be a new line. That is a force multiplier. You're saving yourself not just a lot of time debugging, but just a lot of psychological harm from hating yourself for writing code that doesn't run. And that must generalize to things like using a homonym, or accidentally using the wrong word, or whatever.
If you were to dial up the investing, what do you think is the best vehicle? Is it a venture firm? Is it a hedge fund? Is it, like, what is it, or the best type of investing practice that would dovetail nicely with the diff?
I think venture is the case where the specific kind of information asymmetry that this kind of newsletter as central node in a network that does not otherwise exist, where collapsing that information asymmetry is the most lucrative. Because especially very early on, like later stage investing is more about matching money to opportunities that require money. And, people, like, you can build a spreadsheet for a late stage investment, but there's a stage at which if you're building a spreadsheet, it is, it's creative fiction. And I think that at that stage, the founder funder fit becomes really, really important. And you want to connect people who can actually give good advice. You want to connect them to people who will take good advice. You can do some strategic things where if you have someone on the cap table, they can actually make genuinely useful introductions. And that's a very hit or miss thing. And I think this is like one of the advantages of Y Combinator is actually kind of turning those vague promises into something people actually get noticed for and get called out for. If someone is on the cap table because they can introduce you to X and they don't introduce you to X, that information can get out in the Y Combinator network, and that's kind of by design. So trying to engineer that sort of thing. So it's basically like trying to be the central node that then identifies other latent networks and finds connects people to the new central node in that network. I think that's where a lot of value gets added. I am active in public markets as well. That's fun. There's always this question of whether, if I write about a company and disclose that I'm long, does that mean I'm biased, or does that mean you should take me seriously because I actually do want to own the company stock? And I tend to basically, companies I own shares in are generally companies I'm interested in. And so I do end up writing about them. And then there's a set of companies where they are either a good buy to me or a good sell to me for very prosaic reasons. Like there's a surprising number of scam companies out there that haven't gone to zero yet. I think a lot of hedge funds that lost money shorting stocks, they have a lot of opportunities to make that money back shorting stocks right now. But there's not that much fun stuff to say about this litany of little scamcos that go public. So I tend not to write about just the fraud du jour, but and I tend not to write about microcaps trading at less than cash on hand, except as like a general category, because I think in that case you do run into this problem of, okay, let's say stocks at $5 a share, companies like marginally profitable, it has $10 a share in cash, and you think that's just too cheap, like it should be 11 maybe, and that's including a discount for it's probably not managed that well, etc. If you write about it and the stock goes to 8, you've immediately made 60%. And if you sell, you're almost certainly selling to someone who literally took your advice and wants to be along for the ride with your investment. And so that's a really fraught position to be in. That's not something that I would want to do. But it's also something where the risk reward has gotten a whole lot worse, because now you know that not only is the stock a lot closer to what you think the fair value is, but now the marginal holder of that stock is not someone who did the research, developed a lot of conviction on their own. They really love this idea, and they want to hand this stock off to their heirs when they die if it hasn't reached fair value yet. It's someone who heard a pitch, thought it was a good pitch, they bought. And I've been in that position. Like a fair number of things that I own or short, I hear about it from someone else. I'm like, yeah, sounds reasonable. But I found that there's the classic line in finance that you can borrow someone's ideas, but you can't borrow their conviction. I have found that works over a fairly short period, but you either follow the company on your own and get more into it than the original person who told you about it, or you find yourself really reactive to any incremental news flow because someone else did a lot of the research. They have a lot more of the context to interpret that. And, if you bought it because it was growing and then it missed earnings one quarter, you feel like, well, now I have to do a bunch of research and I've already lost money. And so now I went from having an asset to having two different liabilities. I have the loss and then I have the time loss. So it actually is just it's a very different process for owning that. So I try to remain really aware of that. And I basically write about and disclose companies that I think I will own for a while and that I think are genuinely interesting companies. And then for other stuff, I will invest in it, but tend to not write about it that much often because there's just a whole lot less to say.
I remember there was a time, maybe it was a year ago or 2 years ago, where you came out with sort of an update on how some of your investments had done, and they'd done phenomenally well. And I was like, wow, I wish I was in the Byrne business.
There was another blogger who actually went through all of my disclosures, and and that was actually a really good year. And and my investing track record is like there's I've done a lot of stupid stuff. I've taken a lot of short-term capital losses on a lot of different things. And part of that is just, I noticed, and this is what many people notice, is that there is no one who's as creative and effective an arguer as someone who is down like 10% on a trade. Like, you are just like the smartest person ever explaining why it's actually an even better deal right now. And so you end up putting all of your energy, if you aren't rigorous about this stuff, you end up putting all of your energy into justifying your own dumb mistakes. And so you're basically like trying to use all of your intelligence to make yourself dumber, which is not a very good habit. So I hate this because I used to be just like a very, very classic value investor. I'm still very influenced by the value investing worldview, but I try to be pretty rigorous about, like, if I buy it because I think it's going up and it goes down, there's clearly something I didn't know. And the more it goes down, the more I should just sell it and rethink. And for different companies, I'll set that parameter at different levels, but I try to be pretty careful about that. And then I think the drawback to doing that is that then you end up with a portfolio of a lot of things where you bought it a year ago and you made 10%, or you shorted it a year ago and it's down 10%, and then nothing else happened. And so it's just sort of sitting there and there's not much to do differently. So I've tried to be more careful about time-based in addition to loss-based stops. Of like, if I'm not more excited than I was 6 months ago, even if it's up and I think I'm right, if it's, if things aren't improving more than I expected, then it's probably time to look at something else.
Totally. You're being very humble, but in preparing for this podcast, I've looked back at a lot of your posts, and I'll see, so sort of when you said you were investing in things, and anecdotally, I'm like, this is done pretty well. And I'll also link to the other post where the other guy aggregated from that specific year. So we'll put a pin in this. On our next episode, I want to go into your other internet media property, Capital Gains, where you explain a lot of finance terms. That'd be fun to dig into. Byrne, always a pleasure. Until next time.
Yes, likewise. This is great.
Thanks for listening to The Riff. Please go follow and subscribe, give us 5 stars, and check out Byrne's excellent newsletter, The Diff, if you haven't already.